All right, listener name, you ready to dive in? Today we're going to be looking at investigations and interviews.
Ooh, yeah, getting into that nitty-gritty.
Kind of like when you're trying to figure out who took the stapler from the supply closet.
Exactly. And we're going way deeper than just the surface level here. We're talking corporate compliance, internal audits, all those tricky situations that pop up in the workplace.
Definitely. And we're going to break down like all the most important parts of investigations with you today. What techniques work and with the help of our expert here, even how to handle those sensitive situations. So first things first, let's set the stage. What are those like key elements that make an investigation actually effective?
The foundation is a structured approach. Really can't overstate that. Every investigation, whether it's a big corporate thing or just an internal dispute, needs a clear framework.
So like where do we even start with setting up this framework?
First, you got to define the problem. Like, what even triggered the need for this investigation? Is it a whistleblower? A potential code of conduct violation? Something else entirely? Figuring that out helps you figure out what resources you need and where to go from there.
So once you know what you're dealing with, it's all about figuring out how to deal with it, right?
Exactly. You need a solid plan. And that plan needs to spell out your goals. What info or evidence are you looking for? Are there legal things or policies that need to be considered? Having that roadmap helps you stay focused and efficient.
So it's not about just jumping in head first. There's a method to the madness.
For sure. Take building your team, for example. You might need folks from HR, legal, maybe even outside experts, depending on what you're investigating. It's all about having the right skills and making sure everyone on the team can be impartial.
Speaking of impartial, it reminds me of innocent until proven guilty.
Perfect comparison. Because the goal isn't to find someone to blame. It's all about uncovering the truth. Objectivity is key. You got to stay neutral and not jump to conclusions.
Yeah, I can see how that'd be tough, especially when you're dealing with people you know personally.
Definitely can be. That's why setting up confidentiality right from the start is so important. Protecting everyone involved and making sure the process is fair. Those are non-negotiables.
It's funny. I remember this one time I was being interviewed for a promotion, and the interviewer kept looking at their watch. It made me feel so rushed, like they weren't even listening. The whole vibe was off just because of that.
That's a great example of how even little things can impact an interview. It shows how important preparation is. Before going into any interview, you need to have the facts straight. Review any documents, reports, emails, policies, anything that gives you context.
So it's not like you're trying to memorize interrogation tricks or be some kind of super sleuth.
Not even close. It's all about setting the right tone. You want to create a neutral environment, non-confrontational, where the person feels okay sharing information. Remember, you're there to gather facts, not grill them.
Okay, so let's say I'm the interviewer. I've done my homework. I know the facts. I'm going in calm and neutral. What about setting ground rules before we get into the questions?
Definitely, ground rules are key. You want to make it clear why you're having the interview and emphasize that it's confidential. It's about being transparent, letting them know that what they say stays between you. But some info might need to be shared with others involved in the investigation.
So it's like balancing that need for confidentiality with being upfront about what that means.
Right. It's not about tricking them. It's about building trust and making sure they feel comfortable being open.
Makes sense. So let's say we've got the groundwork laid, we've created a comfortable environment and set some ground rules. Now comes the tricky part, asking the right questions. What are some techniques that really work?
The way you ask questions has a huge impact on the answers you get. One super effective technique is using open-ended questions. So instead of asking, "Did you see the email?" try, "Tell me what you remember about the email."
Ah, I see what you mean. It makes them give a more complete answer, not just a yes or no. It gives them space to tell their side.
Exactly. And it forces you to actually listen. Pay attention to what they say, their tone, even their body language. You'd be surprised how much you can pick up from a pause or a change in posture.
So reading between the lines is just as important as the words themselves.
You got it. And it's in those moments when they hesitate or elaborate that you might need to change your questions a bit. Like say you're talking about a meeting, instead of asking, "You were at the meeting, weren't you?" Try, "Can you tell me about your involvement in the meeting?"
It's subtle, but I can see how that first question could lead someone to a certain answer, even if it's not really true.
That's the problem with leading questions. You accidentally influence their response, which could mess up the info you're trying to get. Also, controlling the pace of the interview is important. Some people need time to open up. Others might try to rush through it. Finding that balance, giving them space to pause and think, can make a huge difference.
So it's like you need to be prepared and structured, but also able to adapt and respond to what's happening.
That's a great way to put it. It's about being aware of the person, the environment, and the info you need. Now, sometimes things get a bit more sensitive. Think about misconduct allegations or dealing with whistleblowers. Those situations need extra care because of the human element.
I bet those are tricky to handle. What are some of the things you got to keep in mind when you're doing those tougher interviews?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. When it's something like misconduct or whistleblowing, the stakes are way higher. Emotions can be running wild, there could be power dynamics going on, and you got to think about the legal stuff too.
Sounds like you got to tread carefully.
You said it. Your composure is key. Even if the person you're interviewing gets upset or defensive, you got to stay neutral and professional. It's about creating a safe space even when things feel out of control.
So you're like the anchor keeping everything steady even in a storm.
Love that analogy. It's not just what you say, it's how you act too. Eye contact, a calm voice, making sure your posture is open and approachable can really help build that connection.
I imagine being aware of the power dynamics is important too, especially at work. How do you handle those tricky relationships?
It's a balancing act. Sometimes just acknowledging the power dynamic can make the person feel more at ease. You could say something like, I know this might be uncomfortable to talk about given our positions, but I want to assure you that my goal is to get all the facts and make sure things are handled fairly.
So kind of like addressing the elephant in the room.
Right. Other times, it's more about subtle cues, your tone, your body language, really showing them you're there to listen and understand their side, like leaning in a little when they're talking, nodding to show you're following along. Those can all help build trust.
It's almost like you're using those unspoken signals to level the playing field.
Exactly. And of course, you always got to be thinking about the legal stuff. If there's any chance of criminal activity or breaking labor laws, you need to be super careful. Knowing when to call in the lawyers is crucial.
Right. You don't want to mess up the investigation or violate anyone's rights.
Exactly. And sometimes the best thing you can do is just step back. If someone's clearly upset and needs a minute respect that, you might say, I can see this is tough. Would you like to take a break or reschedule?
So you're saying that paying attention to how they're feeling is just as important as getting the facts.
100%. You're dealing with people, not just information sources. Okay, so let's say you've made it through this potentially tough interview. You've gotten good info, stayed professional, and respected everyone's boundaries. What are the next steps for ending the interview and moving forward?
I'm guessing a thanks for your time doesn't really cut it.
Nope. Wrapping things up professionally is just as important as the interview itself. You want to make sure everything's clear and they feel like they were heard. It's good to summarize the main points and make sure you understand their story correctly.
So giving them a chance to clarify or correct anything before you go further.
Exactly, and it shows you were really listening. This is also when you can remind them about confidentiality and explain what happens next. Will there be more interviews? What are the possible outcomes of the investigation?
Sounds like transparency is key every step of the way.
For sure. And of course, you got to document everything. Detailed notes about what was said, the exact questions, answers, any little things you noticed. It all becomes part of the official record.
So even those tiny details could be important later on.
You never know. And don't forget to write down the date, time, and place of the interview. Those little things can be crucial for making sure the investigation is solid.
Gotcha. Notes taken. What about follow-up? Is that always necessary after an interview?
Not always, but it's usually a good idea. Sometimes an interview brings up new questions or you find inconsistencies that need more looking into. You might need to talk to other people, get more documents, or dig deeper into certain parts of the case.
So it's kind of like putting together a puzzle.
Yeah.
Each interview, each document, each piece of info helps you see the bigger picture.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And once you've got all the info from interviews, documents, and anywhere else, it's time for the analysis phase. That's where you really start connecting the dots.
Okay, that sounds interesting. How do you sift through all that info and make sense of it? What are the main strategies for analyzing everything and reaching a conclusion? Okay, so we're back and ready to put those detective skills to work. We've talked about setting up the investigation, mastering the interview, and dealing with those situations that need a little extra care. Now it's time for the big reveal, analyzing what we found and reaching a conclusion.
This is where the real detective work kicks in. You've carefully gathered info from interviews, documents everything. Now it's time to figure out what it all means. It's like putting together one of those really complicated puzzles.
So where do we even begin with this puzzle? Do we, spread everything out on a giant table like they do in the movies?
Well, a giant table might not hurt. But seriously, it's all about organization. You gotta create a system that helps you see the big picture. Think timelines, charts, summaries of the key points, Anything that helps you spot patterns, inconsistencies, connections between all the different pieces.
So we're looking for those aha moments, those links that maybe we didn't see during the interviews.
Exactly. You're comparing what people said, checking if different sources back each other up, flagging anything that doesn't quite add up. It's all about cross-referencing and asking yourself, does this match up with everything else I found?
What about when things don't match up? Like when you have conflicting stories or missing information?
That's where your critical thinking skills come in. You got to question your assumptions, look at things from different angles, and maybe even go back and get more information. Sometimes you just can't get a clear-cut answer. It's about recognizing what you don't know and being honest about those limitations.
So it's not always about finding a perfect solution. Sometimes it's more about understanding the nuances and presenting a balanced view.
Exactly. It's about laying out the facts as you found them and pointing out any areas where you might need to dig deeper.
Okay, let's say we've gone through everything, analyzed all the info, considered different perspectives, and looked at all the possibilities. How do we go from analysis to actually making a conclusion?
This is when you take a step back and ask, what does the evidence tell me? Has someone broken a rule, crossed an ethical line, or is there another explanation that fits with what you found? It's about connecting those dots and drawing conclusions based on the evidence you have.
And those conclusions can have big consequences, right? Like disciplinary action changes to company policies, even legal stuff.
Absolutely. This final stage of analyzing and concluding is super important. You got to be thorough and honest. Your findings need to be backed up by evidence, and you need to be able to explain how you got there.
It sounds like this whole process takes a special set of skills, part detective, part analyst, and even a little bit of diplomat.
You nailed it. And that's what I hope you take away from this deep dive listener name. Whether you're conducting a formal investigation or just trying to figure out a tricky situation in your life, understanding these principles can help you face challenges with more clarity, objectivity, and confidence.
So there you have it, listener name, our deep dive into investigations and interviews. We've covered a lot today, from setting things up to mastering the art of questioning and reaching informed conclusions.
Remember, every interaction, every conversation is a chance to learn to listen and to uncover the truth.
And hey, maybe this deep dive has sparked a new interest in investigations for you. Maybe you'll be leading the next big corporate investigation, or maybe you'll just be better equipped to handle those everyday mysteries that pop up in life.
Either way, I hope you found this journey insightful.
Until next time, keep those detective hats handy, and we'll see you on our next deep dive adventure.